All right, we are all set on that count. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with the City Forest Officer. This day focused on native trees and their use and urban wildlife and tree species selection. If you're joining us for the first time, or as a reminder to all of us as we get started, we're having these sessions on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month as an opportunity to share updates on different projects, information on urban forestry best practices, and as we prepare to develop the city's first urban forest management plan. Today is not an update on a specific area that we're doing work on, but on a topic that was requested by our participants in the fall. We had a number of sessions and we gather all the questions each time, and during each session I do focus my answers on the questions relevant to the topic of the day. The first one in January, we had a more open-ended discussion, but most of the sessions, as we focus on a specific topic with the limited time we have, I just answer the questions relevant to that topic. But we've been gathering the questions, and at the end of October, we'd put those into a poll and said, what do you want to hear a special session on? We see these interests that we aren't getting to on these topics. What's a topic you want to hear about? And of no surprise to me, the topic that rose to surface both in the number of and frequency of questions we received and in that poll was around native tree species and urban wildlife considerations in our species selection. So today I'll be sharing some of my thoughts related to this, but we're actually going to attempt to do some additional audience participation today on this topic, as I really want to hear more from you all in terms of priorities and suggestions. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite topics of discussion is talking about tree species. So I'm going to go ahead and type into the chat now the website that you should be pulling up, if I can do that, so that you can be prepared. If you're joining on your phone, this might be a little bit more challenging for you, but I'm hoping that we can all test it out and try it together. So I'm putting in a link to menti.com, which we'll be using a little bit later on, but I'm just putting it in the chat now. So if you wanted to pull it up and have it open on the side so you're ready to go, Zoom on one side of the screen, menti.com on the other, and I'll give you, you'll see the code that you'll type in when we get to that part of our little talk. So I'm going to be trying to abbreviate the time I'm speaking today and do some of this polling, and then we'll do as much Q&A as we have time for at the end. And I'll start by saying this is the beginning of the conversation, and undoubtedly we'll have more conversation moving forward. So now that I've got that in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and work on sharing my screen. There we go. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So again, City Forest Officer Lunch and Learn session. We're talking about native plant selection in our urban environment. And I'm going to go ahead and again, here we have the poll. If you wanted to see, these are the topics that we did in the poll in October. And we said, look, native trees and urban wildlife and species selection had the most, actually tied with plans for ensuring ongoing resources for maintenance, which we will be covering at a future session. But we're going to go ahead with native trees and urban wildlife. I'm going to take us back to what I talk about every time, which is the 4 pillars of urban forest management. So again, we need to be really investing all 4 of these areas: planting, preservation, maintenance, and engagement. Today, I'm going to consider us looking at the areas of both planting and engagement as we really focus most of our session on getting feedback from you all. And planting, obviously, as we're talking about species selection. The other thing I'll remind us of is our guiding principles, that we want to be really rooted in science and utilizing partnerships. And moving forward, I'll be sharing more, as I shared it last month, that 2 of my priorities for this spring are our street tree selection guide, working on updating our master street tree list, and working on our tree preservation ordinance. And so obviously we'll have more species conversation around that master tree list as we move forward. So today, I'll just start off by saying, as we think about tree planting and picking species, I go back to the old school right tree, right place. So we have to think about what tree is going to do well in the site conditions we have available. And I'm going to attempt to switch to show you just a quick image. So here we have a tree in beautiful trees. Actually, this was taken March of last year, close to the UFD offices in downtown. And you see these are not native trees, but these are pink trumpets that are in bloom along these corridors. But I want you to look at where they're growing. So in this case, we have very small tree wells, 4 by 6 foot tree wells that these trees are planted in and will grow in for the remainder of their lives. In some parts of the city, we have parkway spaces that range in size from 2.5 feet all the way up to 10 foot plus, but by and large, they're not very wide. So when we look at a site to think about what we're going to plant there, we start with what are the conditions that this tree will be living in, and how can we ensure that tree will thrive in the course of its life. So we think about available space. We think about the soil type, the climate, other factors surrounding it. And again, this is a highly urbanized picture, very dense downtown development. But we're thinking about, all of these components. Where's other infrastructure? Can that infrastructure be moved or not? What are the uses of this space? We think about all those things. And then we also recognize that when we plant a tree, these are investments, both in terms of staff time for procurement, tree planting, establishment care, to get the tree going at the beginning of its life, and maintenance, as well as in terms of the resources of water that we use to get these trees going at the beginning. We know that they help capture water over the course of their lives through that canopy, having rain hit it and being slowed down and having time to percolate into the ground. But we are using resources when we put in street trees. So when we are making those investments, we want to be putting in trees that have the best opportunity to provide significant benefits and live long, healthy, and productive lives in very challenging conditions. And that brings me to thinking about, when we talk about native trees and native plants, the truth is that we have to think about what was here before. And I'm sorry, I'm taking away the screen share for a moment because I did spend most of my time prepping for today looking at making sure we were prepared with the Menti tool. But we need to think about what was here prior to our urban built out environment. And we know that trees grew along our riparian zones, that is along the LA River and the tributaries that lead into that. They had plants that really liked having their roots in that seasonal water and that influx of water that we got. We also know that in the hillside areas, we had native plants and trees. And in the valley, there were areas that had different oak species that were growing in those spaces. So when we think about what was here before and we consider those plants, we then think about that urban context. And again, the image I showed you is kind of like the worst case scenario. We got really small urban area, very small cutouts. We also know that we have parkway spaces throughout the city that can accommodate different trees. But when we look at a small space and we think about some of the chaparral plants or shorter trees that were native to this area, and we think about a 4-foot space, I know that we're going to encounter one, sure, those trees won't uplift the sidewalk over time, but they may impede the pedestrian walkway if they grow in their natural form. So if they're used to being short and wide trees they're growing out, we find that sometimes they get into the pedestrian walkway or into the street, and that's not ideal. Similarly, I've shared before that Coastline Oaks are one of my favorite trees overall. I love their adaptation to our environment. I love their look. I think the amount of wildlife that they can support is just stunning. But we know that they need a lot of space to grow. And so a street tree condition is not the most conducive space unless we have a really wide parkway space. And so those wide parkways are ideal. And I know that our team at LA Sanitation Environment has shared in recent presentations that when they see opportunities with their grant programs for large locations for trees, that they want to plant Coastline Oak and other natives there. So we have these kind of site constraints that make it so that it's challenging to plant some of our native species. That being said, now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do moving forward. That's kind of the conditions that we come into. We have a number of things going on that I think will continue this conversation around how we look at native species. One is we have our biodiversity team that has their biodiversity report that was just released from 2020. They're working on different mapping and connectivity data. They're going to be sharing that information with me so that we can talk about how we prioritize habitat connectivity in critical areas, and having a discussion about how tree species, in particular street tree species and selection, can add to that habitat connectivity. We're looking at research partnerships and really do look to work like that of Eric Wood, that looked at different tree species that aren't native and how the impact that they had on bird species. And these are some things, I'll make sure to put a link to some of these resources in the blog post that will be posted on the Board of Public Works website after the webinar, so that you can go ahead and click in on those and do some additional research yourself. We're listening to some of our research partners that are encouraging us to think about other North American tree species that may also provide an enhanced habitat value, even if we can't have site conditions that are conducive to some of the trees that were actually native to Los Angeles and to the neighborhoods where you live now. I'm also really encouraged by the Healthy Soils goals laid out by the city, as well as the Healthy Soils initiative being led by tree people and their partners, as I think that that will help elevate some of our understanding around soil conditions and what we can be doing to improve soil quality when we plant. And last but certainly not least, we have the equity project that we're working on, where we're looking at addressing tree canopy inequity across the city. And within that, we go to the question of, is there enough space in these communities to plant the large stature trees that will provide the shade that we need for human benefit, which goes back to the conversation I've had with you all in previous sessions. We've talked about our urban forest is largely human-made and requires constant human intervention, and is in place largely to provide benefits to humans. And when we have these site conditions that don't allow us to accommodate some of the wildlife considerations, we are going to look at that human component of shading of pedestrians and those ecological services that they're providing to our neighborhoods, while knowing and hearing from you all that habitat value and elevating native plants is really important to our communities. We want our plans to really reflect your values as much as possible. So with that, I want to really hear from you all. I'm an arborist. I consider myself even more so an urban forester. And in my work, I tried to incorporate feedback from other disciplines and other groups, and this being no different. Feedback and perspectives are always welcome. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can start the menti.com, the Mentimeter. Here we go. Go ahead and pull that up. So what we're going to do here is, again, we're trying something new at Lunch and Learn, using a different tool to get some of your feedback. So you're going to go ahead and go to menti.com and use the code listed here, and I'll read it out loud. It's 4596199. And we're going to go ahead and ask our first question, which is, what is your favorite native tree? I get lots of questions on what my favorite tree is. And usually I'm like, let's talk about what kind. Are we talking shade tree, fruit tree, native tree? So let's see what some of our favorite trees here are with our participants today. Love it. I'm going to keep that open for a little bit longer. So get it in there. I see our newly protected species are added in there. We got some of the, our toyon and elderberry were just added to our list of protected species, and we've got some other ones there, and Coastline Oak right in the middle, that keystone species showing up nice and big on our word cloud. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question. So what native tree species would you like to see the city plant more and or include in our planting list? And so here, I think we've given you the option to write in up to 10. I don't think that any of you, maybe you do, you have 10 different species, but I wanted to provide as much space as possible. So we'll give a little bit of time for you all to type in there. And we'll be able to see the responses coming up as people input their information. And I love, feel free to use common or scientific names if there are species that you want us to include or plant more of. Um, I love that. If space allows oak, I'm with you. And we've got some smaller native plants that again, may not be for street tree components, but I do love to see those other names and seeing those priorities. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. This is fantastic. Love seeing all this information coming in. And I'll give that about another, let's say another 15 seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move us to the next one. Another great set of answers, and I'm gonna see if we can capture these images and again, include that in the blog post so you guys can all have some time to enjoy looking at those responses from all of our community members that are joining us today. Next one, I am gonna ask you to rank in order of importance. Where would you like to see more native trees planted? And so here it's going to ask you to pick, first choice. And right here it shows up 1, 2, 3, 4 at arbitrary. But you're going to go ahead and say, is it street trees that we really want to see more? And I understand I hear you on the other end if you're saying all of them, please. But we're going to ask you to prioritize. Do you want to see them planted as street trees, as park trees? And what we mean by undeveloped or natural areas are those areas that don't have active irrigation or ball fields or grassy areas, the areas on the parts of our park that are more natural areas. And then developed areas, again, being those grassy areas. Oh, and it's having the unintentionally, I think I will go ahead and allow the results to be showing. I didn't know that it was hiding them. So I'm trying to see if we can show the results. It's not showing them to me. Well, maybe I need to close voting and then we'll see. Let's try it together. Nope, it's not showing us. And this is the one where I'm really curious to hear what you guys have said. And it says that 45 people have either submitted or what have you. So maybe we're having a technical glitch. I'm definitely, I'll try one more time to unhide. There we go. Do it again. Okay, so I see that out of the options that we provide you, and thank you for your patience as I use the new technology. I see that park trees and developed areas. So those areas that may be around our picnic areas or grassy areas are an area where that's particularly important to you all. Although it's interesting to see if the answers change when people see what the top one is. Wonderful to see 52 people that have participated in this one. Okay, and the last one I'm gonna leave open. I'm gonna show the question, I'm gonna read it to you, and then I'm gonna give you some time to answer. So, and while we're doing that, I'm gonna pivot to see if there's any questions in the Q&A. Because this is an open-ended answer. And on this one, I have made sure that the results should be showing immediately. This is really my saying to you, you've heard a little bit of my talking about some of the site considerations and then things that we're working on to maybe see if we can further accommodate or prioritize natives in certain specific and strategic ways, different research that we're utilizing, different programs that we're working on. But what are strategies you think the city should consider when trying to encourage the incorporation of native trees and urban wildlife? Are there things that you think we should explore further, or different ideas that you think should be part of what we're aware of as we're thinking about tree species selection and encouraging that? So, and this one, like I said, it's open-ended. You can answer as many times as you want. So once you click send, it'll keep giving you a blank box to write into. And then we'll go ahead, and while that's coming up, I'm gonna go ahead and take a look and see if we have any questions, because we do have about 9 minutes left. And again, I wanted to focus on hearing your guys' responses. I'm seeing some make more parks Provide native trees for free for planting around the city with a focus on areas that don't already have them. Continuous parkways, complete streets, bury power lines. I hear that, you know, if we have the low ground power lines, which is expensive, it allows us more space above to plant those large stature trees. Public events, collaboration with the central library, include habitat values as tree selection criteria, larger tree wells, more space for communal gardens, expanding parkway planters, expanding soil root zone, and incorporate more water harvesting with a community design approach. These are, stop worrying that the sycamores take water, they are worth it. I was thinking this morning of a park in Wilmington that has old growth sycamores that is just awe-inspiring when you get to see it. Wonderful. So I'm going to trust that you guys are continuing to respond as much as you want within this category. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Q&A for myself. So we have one question about the Menti, and hopefully you saw the code when we did it. Let's see. This is from Catherine. Hi, Rachel. I have 6 oak tree simblings growing at home, ready to be planted outside soon. Where in the city would you recommend I plant them? So right now we don't have the capacity to take tree donations. So maybe see if you have neighbors or friends that have room in their yards for that tree. That would be my best advice at this moment, as we don't have a program where we can receive tree donations. But that is the wonder of nature, right? In our natural areas, they're able to drop seed on the ground and grow new plants, which in a street tree component we aren't able to do. Kelly Griffin says, I see so many topped trees, including street trees, and I can't find any stance that the state has taken on tree topping as a practice. I'm concerned that the focus is on planting trees only and not extending the lives of established trees we have. Is this something you're already working on? I will say that we are going to talk more about maintenance issues at a separate session, but I will just say, if you haven't joined us on a previous session, we are looking at those areas of planting, maintenance, preservation, and community engagement. And today we are focused on planting. So we are looking at native tree species in our planting lists and how we accommodate those, but we are talking about maintenance issues. And definitely, topping trees just feels terrible when you see it, and we definitely are thinking about that. Anne asks, what kind of native trees can we plant on parkways that are 8 feet wide? We already have several mesa oaks. Any other suggestions for trees that are not the slowest growing? I am going to think about that one. You know, the truth is that our oaks are fantastic and they are slower growers. So you do get the benefits from those trees, but it takes a while. It is similar to the comment earlier about sycamores being worth the water. To me, it is worth the wait. It is a long-term investment to plant oaks. And I know some people would push back on whether or not they're slow growing. I will acknowledge that. You know, on parkways that are 8 feet wide, I would need to better understand the neighborhood and take a look at it. And that's part of what we do as urban foresters. We walk in a community and we look at the space and we look at the surrounding infrastructure and the, you know, climate conditions. Are we close to the coast? Are we close to the hillside areas? And I really look forward to working with the biodiversity team on kind of, again, looking at the habitat connectivity potential and how we can better use plants to enhance that in key places. Native trees as street trees have a lot of maintenance need. Some are short-lived, etc. The city always has struggled with maintenance. Won't more native trees exacerbate this situation? And that's from Gordon. So we do need to work to maintain our trees, and that's part of the reason making really strategic investments in what we put in the ground for street trees is critical, because it does take resources, and we are advocating for adequate resources for our urban forestry division and recreational parks forestry teams to be able to provide the level of maintenance that mitigates risks and expands the benefits and life cycle of that tree. I don't know that native street trees would exacerbate that if they're appropriate for the location. And that's, again, kind of the scenario that I was laying out today, is that a lot of cases we don't really have site conditions that accommodate native trees as street trees, but when appropriate, when we have sufficient space, or if we're adjacent to a space that has you know, traditional waterways and those kinds of things, I don't see them as being more problematic. Again, it's very site specific. Um, Interested in your thoughts about Acer macrophyllum in the public right of way. Also curious about sourcing these, and the city nursery mentioned in the last talk, maybe contract growing. Um, I don't, I'm not going to respond specifically about that species in the public right of way. Note to self, I should have had my handy. Oh, I do. I have an old version of the Street Trees Recommended for Southern California book, one of my favorites. I will just talk briefly about the nursery. It is an area that we are exploring with Rec and Parks and other partners, including City Plants, looking at how we might utilize the Commonwealth nursery space to think about species and make some decisions. And contract growing is always ideal if you have the resources to have that kind of arrangement. We don't currently, but definitely is on deck for the kinds of things we should be thinking about. So thank you for that question. And I'll take a look at that species. We'll do a couple more. We have about 2 minutes left, and I love that the answers are still coming in on the question of strategies. Does retention of healthy and old growth trees fall into this discussion? I think today we're talking based on community interest on making sure the city is thinking about native trees and how we're thinking about native trees when we're planting new. But definitely this is hitting, and thank you, Julie, for this question. This is hitting on the preservation element. And those of you who were with me at the last session know that working on our tree preservation policies is part of what I'm working on this spring with a cross-departmental team within the city, as well as input from stakeholders, including you all at certain points during the spring. We'll be talking about our protected tree ordinance and how healthy and old growth trees, particularly native species, are protected by the city and how we can do that even better. Let's see, I've got time, I think, for one more. This is from Rich. Hi, Rich. We'll be planting about almost 200 trees in Hollywood soon with LA Sanitation by April. When can we expect, where can we find this updated species list for planting street trees? And look forward to seeing it updated and don't want to miss it before planting. So the updated species list is going to take a little bit more time, partly because it's not just about the list, it's about the methodology we use to pick trees on site and making sure we have that biodiversity information, that we're using our tree inventory data. And I do know that the Hollywood bid conducted their own inventory. And so they have some data on the trees in their area while we're working on the citywide inventory currently with Davie Resource Group. So the updated species list will probably not be completed by April, but we can definitely share. And I've been working with LA Sanitation information, particularly for such a large project, make sure that you have up-to-date thoughts as you develop the species for the project. I'm sure that they're doing a great job. And unfortunately, that's time. We have several questions left, not too many, but a couple questions left. I really appreciate you all coming today and sharing your feedback. I'm going to take a look at the questions and see how we can incorporate some of them into a future session as we continue our discussions around tree planting, preservation, maintenance, and engagement, and how we can do that better in the city of LA to have a really robust urban forest that provides us with all those eco benefits, as well as beautiful places for the people and wildlife of LA to live. So hope to see you in 2 weeks. We'll continue the conversation then. Thanks for taking the time.